Okay, well, the plan was that I was going to shoot Final Fantasy X's finale tonight. It was going to be the big groundbreaking thing where I finally break away from the Highlander stuff because I was doing a lot of this stuff lately. I really wanted to get the series finished, but a couple of the props I ordered hadn't arrived yet, and I couldn't shoot without them. And I can't shoot till Sunday because my brother's working, so long story short, I decided I'm going to do some commentaries because I like doing commentaries. And this kind of started when I was going to SGC, and the guests were announced, and I think I was kind of a surprise announcement because I'm not actually with Screw Attack. And Pat emailed me, and to be honest, I hadn't really heard of him before. That's not to say that he's not worth hearing about. Actually, I rather like his stuff, and meeting him, he was a really fun guy. So yeah, check him out. But he emails me, and I immediately go start checking out some of his stuff because I always like to. That always kind of bothered me when you meet people you're working with and they've never seen your stuff. So I checked him out immediately, and he says, I got this idea for a crossover because I noticed you're a really big Highlander fan. You got a Highlander 2 poster, and I've always wanted to talk about. He considers himself something of an expert. This, by the way, this is a really good sketch, and when I start talking about working with Pat, I want it known from the beginning that working with him was kind of a strange experience in that he doesn't work like any of the other guys I've worked with before, and so when I come across as saying working him with strange, that's not to equate that with bad. Because I was actually very impressed with the final result, but I'll get to that. So he says the way he really wanted this started because he had a real bone to pick with me, and it was because of the Privateer 2 review. That is a game he loves, and it's actually one of those games where I actually rather respected his opinion because he didn't really disagree with many of my critiques. In fact, he very much. How do I put it? He pretty much said I had it nailed when I said it was a really great movie. Like, the actors, the FMVs were really good, but it was an unfinished product. The game really wasn't tested well. And actually, the reports I've read say that Privateer 2 was actually very thoroughly tested, but when they sent the results back, the notes they had for how broken the game was, Digital Anvil or EA or whatever, they didn't listen, they didn't care, they were trying to rush this thing out, and so apparently it was tested, and they took notes on everything that didn't work, but nobody cared. Nobody in development cared. But he did have an issue with the fact that I was really, really hard on it. I kind of made fun of some of the cheesy sets and the kind of weird places with the people in the slim good body suits doing dances and stuff like that, but he really just had he that was the first thing he said, and I was actually kind of hooked on that because I always like scenes where I get confronted by fans of stuff that I really like, because I actually haven't had any really good confrontations with fans of like Final Fantasy VIII. The best one I can think of would probably be when I got into it with some PR flacks and some real fans of Final Fantasy XIV on the floor of PAX. We got into a pretty good argument there. So, working with Pat, this is a long review, and he split it up into 3 parts. And he had a really strange style. I was like, he comes over to my room, and he has no script. And I'm the kind of guy who really, 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 really wants to have a script. Like, I script everything out. My days of improv are long behind me. So, he comes in, I'm like, okay, what are we doing? He goes, well, we're going to do this thing where I come to the door and I knock on it and you answer the door and you're like, yeah, what? And I say, I'm a real big fan of Privateer. And so I'm like, yeah, but where's the script? He's like, oh, no, we got this handled. We'll do this. And so I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, we'll just do it come naturally. I'll say, and so I kind of had to pin him down. I was like, no, I need to know what you're going to say, and I need to know what to say. Because, like when I do a review, it's a very finished product. Like, most everything is pretty carefully chosen so that it stays on topic, it doesn't ramble, and there's no real there's no dead air. And so Pat was like, he kind of coached me through it, and so we did like 8 takes of that scene where he's at the door, and we had to do it from every different angle, of course. And so he actually had a cameraman too, which is something I wasn't accustomed to. I'm very Kevin Smith, where I set the camera at the far end of the room and I sit in front of a chair and I do it. But we do this thing, and so he's got all these ideas for sketches, and so I'll talk to the. I'm actually kind of watching the movie out of the corner of my eye, so I'll talk to it when I can. So Pat's like, okay, so he actually did have something of a script. It was almost like what I started doing when I very first started doing reviews, where I had like notes, I had bullet points that I wanted to address. Like for The Thing, that was the first time I ever used a script of any kind, was The Thing, where I had a list of bullet points of things that I wanted to say. I didn't have it scripted, but I was like, I want to talk about the puking. I want to talk about the simultaneous puking. And so he had this list of like 1 page of it was probably 2 pages, but scenes in particular that he wanted to talk about. So the scene with the dude with the feather, going up the guy's ass, and the really goofy hair that Christopher Lambert had. He's like, yeah, I want to talk about these things, and the Last Supper. So I'm like, yeah, but I don't get you. And he kind of sensed I was getting frustrated. He's like, well, this is how I work. He's like, so just talk about this scene. And so me and him just kind of started bantering back and forth about these scenes. And I'm sorry, I got so caught up in the movie. And he's like, well, don't worry. I kind of had to say, like, we really need to have some kind of scripted voiceover. And I'm actually not sure if he had one in mind before this or not, or if he just wanted to shoot the host segments first. But there's a lot of scenes of me and him just kind of bantering about stuff. The fact that the sanctuary here is on holy ground in the theatrical cut, but in the DVD cut, it's not. So there's a lot of scenes, and this whole time I'm kind of thinking in the back of my head, this is going to be terrible. It's not going to seem like a review, not like I do a review. It's just going to seem like two dudes just kind of having a round table discussion. And so I was kind of having this internal struggle with myself, like, what is this going to be like? Because this is not what I do. And I kind of had this impression that's what I was doing was kind of what he wanted to do. Because, like, whenever I do crossovers with that guy with the glasses crowd, Linkar, Bennett, they all kind of do it the same way, where we have a scripted review out, we have, a script for voiceovers, and we never really freewheel. And so he also wanted to do this thing where he gets irrationally turned on by the homoerotic content of the movie, especially Jacob Kell. So there'd be all these scenes where, like, the guy's doing the feather, and he's like, excuse me a moment. So he runs off camera, and he starts to... He's going to the bathroom to jerk off, and so he keeps coming back and forth. He does this recurring gag like 4 or 5 times. And so this whole time I was like, it's a pretty funny gag like once, and are we really going to do this like 4 or 5 times, like every time something kind of somewhat gay goes on? And so he keeps running off. And so if it seems like I'm bashing the guy, I'm not, because watching this review, I'm actually very, very impressed with it, because I think, he kind of went through all the footage. He wrote a really great VO script to narrate the footage. And I think he kind of went through the stuff, through all the footage that we shot, all the sketches, and he really did kind of get tough with himself and figure out what worked, what didn't. And he kept it on topic, and he kept it on track, and he cut it into a fairly well-paced review. And so he kind of had a style where he really just wanted to keep us talking. I kind of appreciate what he was doing now, where sometimes the funniest stuff isn't scripted. And so there's a lot of moments here and there where we're talking and just kind of, bouncing ideas off one another and talking about what worked in the movie, what was really funny about the movie, kind of doing impressions of the lines. And so we had a lot of footage to comb through. But, when he used the VO script as a framework, and then used all the stuff we shot as flavor. He kind of picked out the gems from that. And it also gave him an excuse. There was a secondary series of videos where it basically is the footage we shot in the hotel room, kind of strung together. And so that worked out pretty well too. The initial reaction to the review that I saw was actually was pretty negative, which I anticipated. But I think by and large, people warmed to this review rather quickly, because it is, in its current form, it is very similar to the kind of reviews I do. And I think people realize that Pat really does have a lot of talent. With a lot of reviewers, you can kind of tell when people aren't not. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say with a lot of reviewers, but with some reviewers, you can kind of tell when people aren't really cut out for the camera. They are not comfortable saying lines. It sounds forced, or you could tell they don't have a very expressive face. And I think that first scene with Pat in his room where he gets mad at me for the Privateer 2 review, when he gets that kind of maniacal glare about, he's got the pancakes or whatever it is, and he's like, I'm going to get this guy. I think you can really see there where he's actually got a lot of talent, very expressive face, and so he's got this flair for the dramatic and this manic feel about him that really does lend well to comedy. So if there was any negative review, it's because there always is kind of a fringe out there that really fears any kind of crossover or change. But this one really does stand on its own. It's actually one of the more fun crossovers I've ever done, even though I said I was kind of reluctant at first, just from the difference in style. But at the same time, I'm actually very grateful for the experience because, when you're off your guard, you're kind of doing something you're not used to. Good things can come from that, and it really does challenge you. And so I think we kind of challenge each other. I think I maybe pushed him a little hard into having a more structured script, but I think it does work here. And actually, that scene with Adrian Paul it kind of looks like Pat there. Okay, so as for the movie, it's actually kind of telling in context of the whole series. And I may repeat myself here and there, especially when I'm talking about the source. I'm actually going to record the commentary for the source next. But it's actually very interesting how each of the Highlander movies fails, because they all do. Even the ones that weren't as bad. So I'm thinking Highlander 3, The Final Dimension, or The Sorcerer, whatever you want to call it. That one was actually not too bad, and I'm not going to review that one just because, in terms of Highlander lore, it's okay. And the reason it's just okay is because it's essentially a remake of the first one, and really, that's all people were asking for from the beginning. Highlander 1 was basic, it was fun, and it had a really iconic score and imagery that we hadn't really seen before. This whole thing with the taking heads was pretty new. And so Highlander 2 was just bizarre. It was a really glorious experiment, really. They kind of threw shit against the wall and it didn't stick. Had it worked, it might have been a great and worthy sequel, but Highlander 3 was a really back-to-basics approach, and you can't fault it on that. But you can fault this one by sheer virtue of them trying to cross over the TV series, and really, they were never meant to cross over. For the sole reason being the whole canonical nature of the gathering and the there can be only one had to be fundamentally altered for the TV series, where there was a lot more immortals, one every week, basically. You had to build a new immortal entirely, and it had to be a MacLeod, because we can't use Connor MacLeod, although they did use Connor in a few cases in the pilot, but whatever. There's Edge. Hey, how you doing? Soda's rule. I completely lost track. Highlander Endgame. So the TV series kind of played by its own rules. It was decent, but the way the series worked was very fundamentally different from the way the movie worked. And whenever they tried to cross over with Connor, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Namely the thing where, Joe opens up the laptop and they actually have a little kill tally. Where they start talking about how many heads Kel's taken and how many heads MacLeod's taken, and they seem to use this as some kind of mathematical basis for who's better. They say, well, Kel's taken like 665 heads, and MacLeod, he's pretty badass, but he's only taken like 400 or something like that. I can never remember the number, but they use the head count as some kind of like commutative property here, like it's some kind of comparison where like, well, the number's bigger, he has to be better. And so, it's a pretty good indicator, but correlation is not causation. There were elements in this movie that I was actually rather glad to see. This movie really excited me at first when I saw when I saw the trailers. And I'll talk more about the trailer in a second, but it did introduce a bunch of stuff that I wasn't really fired up to see Connor and Duncan on the same screen, because, again, I was never really fired up about the whole crossover prospects of the series anyway. But what really did excite me was the fact you had a guy who was breaking the rules. They were doing new stuff with it, and stuff that wasn't just completely out of left field. Like, what if a guy, kind of bopped around with 5 or 6 other Immortals? Or what if there was ever something so bad that the Immortals had to team up to face it? And so that was what the trailers were putting forward was, okay, here's this guy who's so bad, the Immortals got to team up and fight it. And so now we were looking at, for the first time ever, really, a serious effort made to do a lot of choreography, a lot of really more flashy choreography with unique weapons, with kind of asking the question, why don't Immortals ever use guns? Well, there's a guy who uses a gun in this one. And so I can't fault them for wanting to try new things. I was actually very grateful to see Donnie Yen in this movie, who was wielding, I believe, like a naginata, or what's the bladed pole arm. What if you had a martial artist who was using like an axe or a pole arm, something, anything else? Because we were so used to the katana and just kind of the guys wielding these 4-foot medieval broadswords. And while it worked, and people were sticking pretty true to their cultural type of weapons, it was cool to see these guys teaming up. You had the prospect of teams on teams, and so it was really exciting to see that. And I think this is the real story of where Highlander Endgame failed, was the fact that it lied. The entire thing was a lie. And pretty much everything you saw in the trailer did not occur in the movie at all. And so, I was actually looking for scenes, as the movie was going on, there'd be scenes of Immortals like walking in a badass line towards the camera, of the good Immortals teaming up. I remember, I think there was a scene where like Duncan and Donnie Yen are in the same team, and I'm like, that looks cool, but in the movie it never happens. There's a scene where Jacob Kell is casting magic spells, like he's got some kind of like reflective sphere in his hand, and he breaks it, and they're walking through some kind of like shimmering portal into another world, and it was really exciting to see in the trailers. Never happens in the movie. And what really impressed me with Pat, when he wrote this script and stuff I didn't know, and like I said, I'm one of the bigger Highlander fans you'll ever see. Pat is amazing. His knowledge of this shit is encyclopedic. And in fact, it's actually rather interesting. I wanted to talk to him more about it, but what he knows about this movie, what probably nobody else knows, is how this movie differs in how many ways between the theatrical, what was seen in theaters, and what got released on home video, because I never saw this shit on home video. Okay? My memories were completely stained by the atrociously bad theatrical cut, which explained nothing. As I recall, this was an insane scene, by the way, where they're like, let's do this like men, and this is a good scene, but it doesn't make any sense. It was really an excuse to give Donnie Yen more screen time, and I can't fault him for that, but whatever. Pat was really, if anything made Pat mad about this movie, was the fact that they cut Donnie Yen out. He barely had any speaking lines. I think he knows like every line Donnie spoke, because it's like 3 of them. And he even knows the lines that Donnie spoke in the theatrical versus the home video versus the work print. What really made him mad was the fact that Donnie Yen just gets killed with no resistance. But yeah, what Pat knows, and what really blew me away is, if you'd watch the theatrical and the movie, you could know the difference between those two. He knows all of them. But what he also knows, what really blew me away, was the fact that he knows the differences between those two versions and the work print cut. There's a scene in this one where Donnie Yen dies. There was an alternate version where Donnie sticks his sword into the wall and then cuts his own head off by like running headlong into it or running necklong into it. That unfinished scene, that blew me away that he knows this. How would you ever know these things? I bet he actually has a copy of the work print cut. I couldn't testify to that, but he's probably seen it at least. There was also a lot of controversy. Honestly, I wasn't really mad at this movie. I hated it. I hated it bad when I saw it in the theater, but I'd never seen it again. It was one of those movies where I just kind of let it go. and it was really rekindled when I started doing the quickening and I saw the source. But yeah, this one was something else, and I hadn't even noticed the excessive reliance on flashbacks before. It was really fucking ridiculous. I'm sorry. There were so many. And I guess I never noticed it just because I was kind of happy to see the fact they brought the flashbacks back. You didn't really see them all that much in the quickening. At least when they did, it was back on Zeist, which sucked. I actually really liked the stuff where they would go back to Scotland. I thought that was really what gave the show its identity, and it's something they never really relied on all that much. Because I always said, if you're going to do a sequel, do a prequel. Because there's all this untapped history, thousands of years of human history. You can go back and do that. And so, in Highlander the Source, it's dropped completely. There are flashbacks, but it's like you see Duncan and Anna in some just glowing white area because they couldn't afford any kind of location. They in the flashbacks. Oh, this fucking laptop! I hate this thing. 661, by the way. I think by the end, Kel gets to 666, which is another really overused cliche. It rather reminds me of Uwe Boll's Seed, which is about a serial killer who somehow managed to rack up 666 kills. Oh, yeah. But the way the flashbacks are designed in this one, really bad. It's the way it's organized is really bad storytelling or editing. It's kind of ironic. The best parts of this movie are the ones that call back to the first. And I think the pink blue-lipped elephant in the room is Bruce Payne. If you don't know, Bruce Payne is the blue-lipped guy, Damodar, in the Dungeons & Dragons movie. And now, while I think about it, it's kind of amazing I haven't reviewed that one already. Actually, I have, but it was a text review. I never got to that one. But, yeah. Bruce Payne in Dungeons & Dragons was entirely bald and lipsticked his lips blue. Very sparkly metallic blue. It was lovely. I don't think to this day there's ever been an explanation for it. He's like the captain of the guard. He works for Jeremy Irons, but he just wears blue lips. I wish I could point to some kind of canonical basis for this in D&D lore. Any kind of race, any kind of class, or a special kit, guild, something that was like, people in this guild have to paint their lips blue. But no, there's no such thing, and it really just it adds a level of, it takes away a level of credibility, I guess. It makes it impossible to take the guy seriously at any given point. The other thing that makes it impossible to take him seriously is because that Bruce Payne is a horrendous actor, amazingly bad, and this is gonna sound, well, I'll just say it. His acting style is very Faye, where he has a Faye. It's about the best way I can say it. Where everything he does is very laced with scenery gnashing. Oh, I wouldn't want to do that. It's almost like Pegasus from the Yu-Gi-Oh series, where everything is laced with melodrama and just, you can see what he does with his lips and his, he very roundly says things, and what's the matter, and very, very seething, very breathy. And if you watch him for any amount of time, he just tries to exude such menace, and it comes across as trying way too hard. And in this movie, more than others, he comes across as very gay. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's hard to be a menacing Fey man. So I don't know, if pulled off properly, maybe it could work, but it's not pulled off properly here. It just comes across like he really wants Duncan to get up in his guts. And yeah, this scene and more than ever, this one was really burned into my memory because. Flashback. That what's the matter? Don't you want to be inside me? There's no way to read that except that he wants his cock in his ass. You know what I'm saying? There's no other way to play that one. Was that written that way, or did he improv that? But wow, that just goes beyond subtext, and you might as well just drop trow and bend over. Like, we're on holy ground. Let's just sword fight the old-fashioned way, man. And like, I can't even conceive of this guy. Oh, and while I'm at it, this was just a bad idea from the beginning. Bringing Christopher Lambert back, especially for this one, the problem with telling a movie about immortals is that your actors are going to age, and this was about 15 years after the original Highlander, maybe even more, and it shows. The Road has kind of owned Connor. You could tell, because, and the thing is, he still has it. He still has that charisma. If you watch Mortal Kombat, he still got that gravitas, But as an actor, trying to make him play like the same guy, the Road's owned the man, and it just wasn't going to work. And what's funny is, pardon me, I just watched a movie made in 1999 called Beowulf, which has Christopher Lambert as Beowulf. And what they did with him was, honestly, Christopher Lambert's stuntman probably has more screen time than Lambert does in total, but it works. The movie really is good. And they do a lot of things with him where they really radically alter his look. He's actually got platinum blonde hair, and he's got a very different look. And really, I think if they were gonna bring Christopher Lambert back, they had to do something a lot more dramatic with his look and wardrobe. Maybe like, I'm basically thinking if you brought him back as Beowulf, like with the platinum blonde hair, much shorter, much more grizzled looking, maybe add some scars. Or kind of made him up to look different, but trying to maintain that youthful look, that wasn't happening. I think they maybe tried to pass off the fact that he was in a chemically induced coma for like 20 years. I think they maybe tried to pass that off as some kind of aging effect, and maybe they would have been better just specifically calling it out, like Connor, man, why do you look older? You shouldn't be. And he's like, oh, the drugs, man. I love the drugs, but they don't love me. Or I don't know what, but. Any fan of the original movie kind of looked at Christopher Lambert and just went, it's not happening, But that's why I think some radically different look might have actually served him a lot better. Where, maybe Duncan calls like, "Wow, you really changed your hair," and Connor's like, "Don't you like it?" And he's like, "Ah, they looks badass." I don't know. But at the same time, I kind of do have a perverse respect for this movie, because I will applaud it for trying to do new things. And yet, doing new things without necessarily perverting the Highlander canon. You know what I mean? Where, like, Highlander 2 tried to do the new things where they tried to introduce, like, an intergalactic element to it. Where do these guys come from? Like, why are they immortal? It tried to answer that question. It didn't work. Okay, fine. This one tried to do new things by introducing new fighting techniques, new weapons. I appreciate that, but the big thing they really tried to introduce in this is the consequences and the reward for winning these fights more than any other. And this one actually also, maybe for the first time, they probably did this in the series, but they explained where immortals come from in this one, where people are potentially immortal and they have to suffer a violent death, which never really bought it. And in a way, I think it kind of ruined the series, because it basically established there was a never-ending supply of immortals, so how can there be only one? And they never really fixed it, but whatever. What they tried to do in this one is justify why they're doing this thing, because, like, the whole tally, the computer they open up that has the running tally of how many heads they've taken, and they're like, oh, well, Kel's gonna fucking kill you, because, he's got 661 heads, and so he's got that much more power. So it kind of goes into an unintentional Dragon Ball Z over 9,000 type thing where, if a guy's number is higher, that means he's got that much more power and he's more badass. And so, it doesn't work, but I can appreciate the fact they tried to do something with it, because in a sense, it never really mattered. They keep saying in the TV series, like, oh, they take his head and with it his power, but what does that mean? And they've never really done anything with that here and there. In the TV series, they did more with it the most. I'm thinking mainly of the Dark Quickenings. But this whole transfer of knowledge and power, I think for the first time in this one, was really put forward, especially when you see the fact that Duncan takes Connor's head, and in the final showdown, you can kind of see that video morphing where his face becomes Connor's, and actually, you know what? In Highlander 3, they did do that thing where Mario Van Peebles killed Mako and got his magic powers. But they also did more to a greater effect in this one, where you kind of pick up fighting styles and you pick up knowledge and things like that. By the way, Duncan MacLeod in this scene, douchebag. Like, what were you thinking, dude? Like, why are you mad, baby? Where are you going? Oh, yeah. You think she might be a little upset by that one. You couldn't just, I don't know, have a healthy conversation like any normal people would. Ah, man, this is a long review. Still trying to think of stuff to say. This kind of goes back to I think I described what did I say the Highlander fan base was like, the kind of people who enjoy picking at scabs. Yeah. This is another example of, every time something Highlander comes out, it looks great. We're like, all right, we're finally getting back on track. The trailer looked awesome. And of course, there's nothing in there that actually happens in the movie. And sometimes I think this guy, Last Supper imagery, and the guy with the son. Oh, fuck you. I hate this guy. We could have had a fight here. This is all I'm saying. It's like, we could have had a fight. Just to establish this guy's a badass, and we just have them all sit there like dumbasses. These guys are all so spellbound by his awesomeness. They just, and at no point do we ever stop to think, like, why don't they all just kill him? Why do they all stand there and just meekly accept this? Love this effect. I should have just left it like that in the movie. Yeah, the big showpiece of this movie, I think, actually is the ultimate battle between Duncan and Connor. It's almost like this was never an issue between fans of the series. I don't think anybody really seriously asked who would win in a fight, Duncan or Connor, but the filmmakers behind this one seemed obsessed with this notion. We had to give them a reason to fight somehow. And you really didn't. You so didn't. Because these guys are so obsessed. Like, nobody wanted to see this at all. It wasn't all that good of a fight to begin with. I mean, just because, let's just face it, Christopher Lambert really sucked at fighting. He's really not that good. And Pat gave various reasons. I'm just gonna say he's old. He in his prime, he swung a katana like a Louisville Slugger. So this was something I don't think anybody was clamoring to see. We never wanted to see Connor MacLeod get killed, especially by Duncan. Are you kidding me? Like, give him a death that he deserves. Give him something that, have him go down swinging against the Jacob Kell. Even in the cartoon, he goes down fighting the big bad. I would have argued that the show really should have been about him anyway and not have him die at all, but they had him in there and they had him die, and I was like, okay, it was a hero's death. I'll give him that. This one accomplishes nothing. It's accomplished merely to fulfill that whole immortal math problem where if you add the number of heads they've all taken, they are higher than Jacob Kell's, and it makes no sense. It's all based on that one idea. And I guess they try to tie it in by establishing the super move, the move that we set up here, because there's no way out of this move. It's absolutely impossible to just let go of the sword, duck. I don't know, but they've established this move, and they have this moment where they share their moment of man love, and whee and whack, down it goes, and the fan base just kind of, as a whole, went fuck you. Pat really likes this whole enjoy scenic Scotland. I need a drink. Hang on. Okay, he took the flashback count a little too far, but when you get to like 20, you've earned it. Because oh my god. Oh yes, this is a better movie. Remember this one and this? Yeah, that was a great movie.
sadly begins to
You just cut your head off your best friend there and accomplished what?
the hell is that globby rectangle behind Duncan?
Only Pat would notice the JVC thing. now that I've seen it, I can't unsee it. And just in terms of movie logic, in terms of storytelling logic, the whole fight didn't need to take place because we've already established this guy doesn't give a shit about the rules at all. You know, he's willing to fight guys 8-on-1. He's willing to kill guys on holy ground. And they had to hack this movie to pieces to remove that justification. Like, you know, we have to fight this guy 1-on-1. We have to fight him in honorable combat. We have to do this. They had to fuck this movie up in the home release version to get it done that way. And it didn't need to be done. You know, we could have had a great scene where you have this ultimate showdown, but again, I think they had to get him out of this movie as soon as possible just because you can't have Christopher Lambert doing these scenes. He can't hang with Donnie Yen. He can't hang with Adrian Paul, not for long. And this was another really good scene. This is why Pat was a really good choice to write this one. He asked if I wanted to write it, and I was like, no, man, you know so much more about this thing. And this is a good example where he actually, you know, explains in the original shooting drafts or the original drafts of this movie why these things had to take place. You know, like why Jacob Kell had to go on that whole Last Supper thing and kill his boys. You know, to kind of get the math on his side. It's still a dumb idea, but at least it justified it. You know, why these guys had to do this thing. And I'll be honest, I saw this movie a long time ago, and I didn't even notice the looped footage. You're about to see the scene where they repeat the same shot with no editing, no tricks. They repeat the same shot like twice in the fight scene, and they just roll with it. You know, like I don't know if it was intentional or it slipped their minds. It really is one of those great mysteries. Well, how something that I guess I say it's obvious now. I didn't see it, but this was before I had become the deranged, murdering psychopath I've become today. Before I really had a critical eye for these type of reviews, I just knew I hated this flick. But you know, now if I watch it today, I'd see this in a second. It kind of reminds me. I can never take Bruce Payne seriously in this stuff because I don't know if you've ever seen Dungeons and Dragons: Wrath of the Dragon God. I think that's what it is. It's the second Dungeons and Dragons movie, and Bruce Payne actually has a cameo or something. I don't know what you call it, but he shows up without the blue lips. But he's the same guy. He's undead now. I think he's a Death Knight. And they're kind of building the whole movie where he's like, I will have my revenge. And so they're all going toward the big showdown. The party's had its ass kicked, and they're all trying to like get to wherever at the last minute. And so there's this scene where Bruce Payne finally breaks out of the dungeon, and he sees the female barbarian across this field. And he spurs his horse. He's like, I'm going to fucking kill this bitch. And so he starts like riding across. He's got his sword raised high in the air. And the female barbarian kicks his ass in like one hit. One. He like, she like just pulls the fucker off his horse and kills him. Oh, no, wait, no, she doesn't kill him. She just beats his ass and takes him prisoner. Yeah, she takes a Death Knight prisoner. But it was like I was watching this movie like, all right, now we're gonna see a fucking fight scene. We're gonna see the female barbarian throw down with Damodar. You know, we're gonna have this awesome fight. And one hit, it's over. And Bruce Payne is immediately bitch made. Super move. Oh my God, the ingenuity, the villainy. They built this movie up the whole time. Oh, we can't beat this move. It's the ultimate fencing move. Nothing can. Because Italian Florentine fighters are the best fighters in the world. I'm just kind of watching the movie at this point. I hated that whole math thing. There's no way you could tell me that Donnie Yen would not have whooped Jacob Kell's ass in a one-on-one fight. There's just no way. Couldn't do it. This was like the ultimate in computer graphics back in the day. We were like, that is so cool. That morphing effect between the two. It was actually, back in the day, we thought it looked pretty stupid back then too, but back then they were like, we use computers to do this, and yeah. We were really impressed with the effects back in the day. Not so much now. Now I could probably do that. Oh.
Do you remember the theatrical version?
Oh, the compositing. That is scary bad.
Not mountains nor clouds in the background. It was
Yeah.
all blue. I thought it was the sky, but
Ladies and gentlemen, this is what's known as a reshoot.
It was as if someone used MS Paint and just
I think I say in my source review, if you're doing worse composites than me, you need to stop. Oh. Oh, man. Don't walk too far. You'll hit the wall. Oh, wow.
Why isn't there another scene coming? How can it end?
This was the biggest change I remember from the movie. I think earlier I said I hadn't seen this movie since I saw it in the theaters. That's probably not true, because I do remember, somehow I remember seeing this scene and being infuriated by it, because it makes no sense. I must have seen it on cable or something like that, like on HBO or some shit, because this scene where she comes back, she's alive. I'm like, wait, what? I'm still speechless by the stupidity of this moment, because you see her die. You see her necklace hit the ground. She's so dead. This, yes, right here. What the fuck is this? Fuck you, movie. Like, oh, see, and the beads and the fucking thing. Shit. None of it. I just know they did a reshoot for this so they could give this movie a happy ending, to where, like, you know, Duncan had something good to look forward to. Like, it wasn't, you know, he just killed his best friend. Everyone around him's dead. He's got Joe left. You know, Joe won't last long, by the way. None of this. I hate this fucking movie. I hate it.
Oh my God, this is a new level of awful.
And it further doesn't make any sense when you take into account Highlander the Source, where she's nowhere to be seen. I'm probably the only guy that's really bothered, by the way, the fact that they introduced these women who are the one true love of Duncan's life. And they just do this in the movie, and they had a 6-year television run to do this, and they didn't do it. You'd think at some point these ladies would have come up, and they never do. And I keep thinking, like, okay, they brought her back for a reason. She's going to be back in the next movie, and she's not. They bring back this Anna chick who's got nothing to do with anything. And they do it in the exact same way. You know, they flash back to this woman we don't know. And of course they're madly in love. They get married, and, you know, Duncan swears his everlasting loyalty to her. And, you know, you'd think at some point in the series this would have come up. Yeah, and it doesn't. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. At this point, I'm just marveling at how cheesy this fucking movie is. So much wasted potential. That's always what killed me about this, was the wasted potential of this whole series. And the fact that you didn't really need to try that hard to do it, to meet it. Syringe up the nose. Couldn't have gone anywhere else. Okay, we're wrapping up, and frankly, this is the scene I like the least. This is probably the point where I kind of he kind of told me to do this character where I was aloof and really wanted him to leave. So if that's why I seem like an asshole in this, he told me to be an asshole. So like, all right. But this scene where we fight, and he whips out a toothbrush, and I forget what I think it's like the TV remote. Pat's like, we're gonna do this thing where we square off. It's gonna be like in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where we have like this big stare down, and I square off with my toothbrush, and like I'm like, what do I use? He's like, I don't know. What do we got? I'm like, I got nothing. I got my camera. I got like underwear, and I got fuck, I don't know. And he's like, the TV remote. Use the TV remote. So I grabbed the TV remote, and we're like, we're gonna this. What the fuck is this? Like. And we kind of stand there looking at each other, and then he's like, and then I think he kind of wrote himself into a corner, like, what do we do? And I'm like, so this is where I kind of got a little frustrated with the guy. I was like, well, don't you know? Like, didn't you write this? He's like, yeah, but we have to find a way to get me out of the room. Like, we don't actually want to fight because it'll take forever.
Actually, hang on a second.
And so I'm like, what if I just lock you out of the room again? Like, I trick you out. And so that's what happens. But yeah, I was not a fan of the scene. I probably would have shot it a different way, maybe just by wrapping up in conventional means. I look fat in this review. I actually have lost about 15 pounds since this review, so if it looks like I got a pendulous gut, it's because I do. I actually look a lot better now. Still working on the gut, but yeah, we're getting there. But as for Pat, I would work with the guy again. He's actually a really fun guy to work with, even though he works in a very different style from I do. He's much more improv than me. That's my Blazing Saddles moment. And in a way, he and I are very much alike. We actually have very similar interests in movies. We have very similar sense of humor, and we're both kind of manic in that way. And we both love Wing Commander. We both love the Privateer series. And even though I thought Privateer 2 was a giant piece of shit, I really did appreciate it for what it was. As a sci-fi movie, it was really, really good. And so I don't even remember this. Thought we'd throw a little spice in there, Jacob Kell style. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys. We'll be back for Highlander the Source.